Oh,
All right, well, greetings, everyone. And since Shabbat is over, then I wish you all a Shavua Tov. We both do. And you'll notice that we've got a different setting for this week's, shall we say, broadcast. And maybe one that's more in keeping with the way in which we approach things as part of Stump the Stars Jewish style. Because since it is Jewish style, and we know that there is that very famous phrase to describe the Jewish people, we are called the people of the book. So that seems to fit our background there. Okay, anyhow, enough said. Let's talk to God, then we'll get rolling. Father, thank you so much for this time together, and really appreciate the opportunity to interact with some stuff that's on our minds and on other people's minds in such a way that we can be more effective in, one, walking with you hand in hand with you in such a way that our lives will be attractive to others, and two, being able to articulate and express the message you've given us and the life-changing things you've done for us. And so we pray for clarity and good communication at both ends so that we will integrate these things in our lives, and so we'll be more effective members of your family. And for all this, we're grateful because of Yeshua, who stepped into our world to bring us into your family. Amen. Okay, now, we've got just a bit of a quandary, and that is because usually what we like to do is to, how should I put it? Give priority to those who are actually live with us, as opposed to those who live stream or come join us later. And as it turns out, there were two things that were submitted to us for this week's discussion. And one came from somebody who's actually sitting right here in front of us, and the other came from someone who's sitting in front of us on the monitor. So since it has been our precedent to allow those who are actually present in the room with us have priority, therefore their submission is going to be the one we'll deal with. We won't deal with the whole of it, but at least deal with part of it. Now, this is a technical question, Jesse. As I'm looking at the monitor, I see one that is
running.
That's the YouTube one.
That one over here, you mean?
So the YouTube one,
Yeah.
So I am now looking
runs
at the
behind
YouTube one, and then the other one is the one that runs behind a little bit,
A
right?
few seconds.
Okay, so I will try to focus on the one that's,
And hiding.
yes, thank you.
That would
because-
be good. He's easily distracted.
I was thoroughly distracted because here I'm talking to you this way, and in the other one, I was waving my hands about something about 3 minutes ago. And it was very, yeah.
He does not like even the captions on the TV unless they're totally synced
Yeah.
with their lips. And
Yeah.
I'm just going, that's impossible. So please try to catch up.
One of my many idiosyncrasies. Now, the question that was submitted to us has multi-layers and and several aspects to its background. But what seems to be at the core, if I'm getting it correctly, it has to do with the nature of the person of Yeshua. Is he deity or is he not? Is that the core of what it is? I know there's some other things that we want to wrap into it. Okay. To make it as blunt as possible is Yeshua God in human form? And related to that is, how essential is that to our belief or to our relationship with God or to the way in which we walk hand in hand with God? And since I've layered it out that way, I may not deal with all three of those things I just described, but the answer is not the same to all three questions. So let me set aside one that we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on. do you have to believe that Yeshua is God, or you're in danger of going to hell? And the answer to that is no. Our relationship with God is, and you can correct me or refine whatever. My understanding is our relationship with God is founded solely on what Yeshua did for us. It's not based on do we know everything about him with all its implications. It's are we trusting him for that relationship? That doesn't deal, however, with what exactly or who exactly Yeshua is. And what I'm going to do is to, as I begin to answer this question, and hop in anytime you choose, is I will turn to something we use every week during our services, pages 40 and 41, Elohim Asher. Now, we chant this and then we say it in English, but if you look at the Siddur and look at the footnote, you'll find that that particular liturgical piece is from Hebrews 1:1-3. And I think it very effectively describes for us just who this person Yeshua is. Now, let me submit my, how should I put it? My excuses right away. When I deal with this subject in a couple courses I deal with it in, I literally spend 2 to 2.5 hours, and Barbara can attest to this because she's been in those courses, 2 to 2.5 hours dealing with the deity of the Messiah from the Jewish sources. So obviously this question will not be answered in totality in any way tonight, but we'll set the framework from a couple texts. Hebrews 1:1-3. And I'm going to do some changing on the fly. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors. It wasn't just our fathers. A long time ago, fathers was a term that was used to describe fathers and mothers, but nowadays it's best to make it very clear that they're dealing with not just the papas, but the mamas as well. In the past, God spoke, that's a whole other subject. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. I'd love to unwrap this sentence by sentence because there's so much packed in here. But now in the end of days, quick reflection on the end of days, the biblical understanding, the understanding in the Newer Testament, coming from Yeshua through Rav Shaul, the Apostle Paul, as history has come to know him, sees us as being in, how should he put it, as the end of days, the understandings at the end of days have been initiated, they have not culminated. And I may deal with this in the class on Thursday as part of our Semitic worldview discussion, because it has to do with the Semitic worldview, that particular understanding. So it's been launched, but it has not been finalized. So that's why in the end of days it's in there. He's spoken to us by the Messiah. I would far better translate it now, not his son, but the son. And that relates to some of the question that was raised in the email that I will not unwrap here, other than to say, he is both the son and his son, but when you do it, when you translate it as his son, in many cases, it seems to make one relationship, one person subservient to the other in the relationship. When you talk about it as the son, in those days, that was a position, a royal position, a position of authority. Whom he appointed the heir of all things. Well, if he's the heir of all things, then he is ultimately ruler of the universe. And in Psalm chapter 2, the coronation psalm that is there, that was used for the coronation of the kings of David's line, talk in terms of making everything on God, placing everything under the feet of the one whom he calls son. He says, you are the son, today I have declared it. Now, Please remember that that's a psalm. It's not a theological text, but it does have some important theological points in there. So he's the heir of all things, that was to be anticipated, and through whom he made the universe. In other words, this text is clear in saying that the creator of the universe is Yeshua, or at least he was a vehicle of creating the universe. Okay. Then it says, and these are descriptive terms to try to understand the nature of the Son. The Son is the full radiance of God's glory. In other words, he is all that God is in his full glory. And there were a couple people who encountered at least partial revelations of God's glory and were impacted by it. We utilized Isaiah chapter 6 as part of the Amidah, the part called Kedushah, last night. Isaiah found himself in the presence of the God of the universe, in the very throne room of God, and where the angels, the angelic beings, were saying, Kadosh, 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 holy, holy, holy. Wonderful terms. No time to get into that now. And what was Isaiah's response? To use the Yiddish, he said, Oy vey, I am in trouble. Watch out. Because he understood that being in the presence of the God of the universe was not only a mind-blowing experience, but a life-shattering kind of experience, if not somehow shielded. Full radiance of God's glory, undiminished in any sense. The flawless manifestation of his reality. So all that God is, as God, is part of Yeshua's reality. He sustains all things by his powerful word. In other words, not only was he involved in creation, but he's involved in sustaining all of creation. I forget whether it's Ephesians or Colossians, but we'll find out in the next couple of weeks as we work our way through Ephesians on Friday nights, where it is. We're reminded that all things hold together because of him. Okay. After he made atonement for sins, he sat down in the place of authority beside the majesty in heaven. And I think that last phrase is the one that most clearly sets the cultural context of his role as the Son. Because in ancient days, sometimes you would just have one person on the throne, sometimes you'd have the Father and the Son both on adjoining thrones. And in a number of cases, it was the Son who had I don't want to use this term very neutrally, the upper hand. In other words, he was the chief one. And as I mentioned on a regular basis, this image of the Messiah sitting in the place of authority by the majesty in the heavenly realms was something that the sages envisioned would in fact take place when the Messiah comes and then fulfills his role. So the sages of old envisioned the Messiah to be sitting in a place of ultimate authority in the heavenly realms. Okay, those three verses are very powerful if you understand what they're saying. And they help us understand the nature of who this person is. By whom all things came into being. That gets us into John. And I'm just going to do a quick survey of the Gospel of John and then pull another reflection.
Just a quick survey.
On this subject, and even, yeah. Okay. I wish I had pulled the Hebrew out for it, so I'll try to remember the Hebrew as best as I can. If I remember correctly, Bereshit haya hadavar. In the beginning, you'll connect that right away with the opening lines of the Torah from Genesis 1:1. In the beginning was the Word. Quick reflection on the Word. As I mentioned in classes, although this is written in Greek and the Greek term is logos, this has nothing to do with what people frequently posit as logos theology or philosophy coming from the Greeks. This is, in fact, the word was at that time in Aramaic, memra. The word was one of the handful of things or titles that were used to describe God in such a way that they wouldn't have to say God. In other words, out of reverence for God. You find this frequently in the Targums, and it's one of the three main terms in the Targums that are used to describe God. So if you understand what was going on in the synagogue of that day, in the synagogues of those days, you had the Torah read, and interestingly enough, you had whoever read the Torah also was responsible for selecting the passage from the Haftarah, or the passage that was the Haftarah from the prophets, that was supposed to be somehow connected or linked to the passage being read from the Torah. So the Torah reader would select what we now call the Haftarah. That means that the person who was the Torah reader had to know the whole scripture by memory. If that is shocking, I'm going to do another quick loop here. Let me quote to you from Jerome, who was in Bethlehem writing about the year 400. It says
80
AD or CE.
CE.
He says, and I quote, "Every Jewish child knows the whole of the scriptures from Adam to Zerubbabel." They had memorized it all. For those of you who don't know who Adam is, look at Genesis 1. For those of you who don't know who Zerubbabel is, he is mentioned in the closing book of the Jewish ordering of the Older Testament, 2 Chronicles. So what he's saying, Jerome is saying there, and it comes across very well in English, even though Jerome was speaking Latin. They know the whole of the Bible from A to Z, from Adam to Zerubbabel. So then the Torah reader would have the knowledge to be able to say, oh, this passage from the prophets connects with the Torah passage I'm reading now. So anyhow, you had the reading from the scriptures. You had the reading from the Torah, reading from the what we now call the Haftarah. There was probably a reading from the Psalms as well, but that's a different story. And then the Hebrew reading would be followed by an Aramaic paraphrase or interpretation that would try to expand the text some. Hence the use of Aramaic. In these explanations, there were several terms for God that were favorites of these speakers and ultimately got written down. And one of the most prominent was, in fact, memra, which is word. That is now the background for word as John is now speaking. He is a Jew who's speaking to other Jews. They would have been in synagogues. They would have known the whole package and context. So in the beginning was the Word. And then it says, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. In other words, he's always been around. Now, in this case, as John is writing, he is separating out memra from God, and yet memra is equivalent to God. How do we know? Well, the middle couple lines say, the Word was with God. I'm trying to think. Oh, in Greek, that is pros ton theon. What you would expect is meth tone, theon. Meth or meta, don't get it confused with the meta of today. There's nothing to do with it. Meth or meta was the usual way of saying with. Pros was a more unusual way of saying with. The term pros means that the people who are being described were, look at me, face to face, eyeball to eyeball. In other words, they were of equal status. This would not be pros. This means I am of higher status. This is pros. So, on a level of equality with God, and in case we didn't get it, he John then makes it very clear, and the Word was in fact God. Now, what was interesting is the word order is different. If I remember correctly, it is God was the Word. All right? And then
Order where?
the word order for the Word was God.
Oh, you mean the word order in
In
Greek?
Greek, yes. And then if we hadn't gotten it all together yet, through him all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. And then it just expands on that further, and we don't have the time to expand on John chapter 1. Then in verse 18, at the end of the prologue, no one has ever seen God. Well, that reminds you to hop on in verse 14 before we get to verse 18. The Word became flesh, this translation has it. In other words, the Word became a human and made his dwelling among us, and we have seen his glory. Ready? The glory of the one and only who has come from the Father. The footnote here is one and only. Yeah, we'll just leave it. I don't want to get into that yet. Okay, the only one. So, full glory. Glory was another one of the terms that was used to describe God in the Aramaic. I've lost the Aramaic term, but if I remember, we'll get back to it. Yikar is one of them. There's another one that's very closely related to it. Then it says, no one has ever seen God, but God, the one and only, that's what the Greek text literally says, who is at the Father's side, seated at a place of authority. He has made him known. Okay. Some translations have this as the only begotten one, but the Greek text favors the only begotten God, or God, the one and only. When you see the term, two quick things here. When you see the term only begotten or first begotten, as it is frequently used in Scripture, it does not mean that this is the one who was the only one birthed by this person. If I recall correctly, the term only begotten or first begotten, no, only, I think it's only begotten, is used of Isaac. He was not the only begotten, but he was the one and only who was promised by God. I was tempted to get sidetracked in something else, but I'll try to avoid that. So the term begotten or only begotten really is utilized culturally, contextually as unique. Hence this translation of the one and only. Someone who is the one and only is unique. If something is one and only, one of a kind, it is unique. Okay, fair enough. More could be said about those verses, but I'll leave them at this point. That's a pretty powerful introduction to this person who's called the Word, who is in the next several verses identified as Yeshua. Fair enough? All right, then, and you mentioned it in your email, John 8:58. In answer to the question, well, it's not the statement. You are yet not yet 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham, and you have seen Abraham. And Yeshua says, I tell you the truth, before Abraham was born, I am. Interesting. That's the Greek form for the Hebrew called the Tetragrammaton, the unpronounced name of God. Don't misunderstand it, because these people, the religious leaders, mainly from the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem, they understood what he said, because look how they responded. They picked up stones to stone him. Why? They'll explain that to you later. But just remember what happened here in John chapter 10. This is as part of his Hanukkah message in John chapter 10. At the very end of it, his concluding line is, I and the Father are one. And again, the Jews picked up stones to stone him. But Yeshua said to them, I've shown you many great miracles from the Father. For which of these do you stone me? We are not stoning you for any of these, but for blasphemy, because you, a mere man, claim to be God. They understood the claim very, very clearly, and so they responded as they were told to respond. There is more in John. There's more in each. You can find stuff on Yeshua's deity in each of the Gospels. And you'll find this scene in all four of the Gospels, and that is when Yeshua is standing before the Sanhedrin, and or at least that portion of the Sanhedrin before whom he was standing. And that's a whole other story, but that we get to in other courses. Yes, in case you're wondering, I am trying to pack this response as full of commercials as possible. The question is finally raised by the high priest. After all the false testimony fell completely apart, and they had no evidence whatsoever that Yeshua had broken any of the laws. Then he's challenged, but who do you say you are? And his response was, you will see the Son of Man riding the clouds of heaven. And what do? They say, we have no further need of witnesses. He has committed blasphemy. He's made himself out to be God. Wait. He only called himself the Son of Man. No, he called himself the Son of Man. One, and he said, riding in on the clouds of heaven. The clouds of heaven incorporate yet another term that was used to talk about God in both Hebrew and in Aramaic. It is Shekinah. In other words, the stuff that inhabited, or what inhabited the Mishkan, the tabernacle, when it was first built, and thereafter, it was in fact the Shekinah, the very glory or the presence of God. Why did they react to him this way? Well, Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14 look forward to the time, as Daniel predicted it, when the Son of Man will come in through the heavens, riding on the clouds of heaven. And then everything will be turned over to him by the one sitting on the throne. They understood the connection, and they understood that in fact was a claim to be God. And so they responded blasphemy. The term Son of Man in the Second Temple period, based on Daniel 7, and then its usage in the Second Temple literature, some of which found its way into what we call the Apocrypha and Pseudepigrapha. The title Son of Man, based on Daniel 7, was a title was used to ascribe deity to someone. So the term Son of God is not Yeshua's phrase for describing his deity, the term Son of Man is in that particular time and culture. Technically, Son of God, this is a whole other story, but since I threw it out there, I'll throw it in. Term Son of God describes him as human, a human servant of God. The term Son of Man describes him as the one who actually rides the glory, the clouds, the Shekinah from heaven. All right. I've said probably more than needs to be said at this point, but certainly not enough to cover the whole subject. But that, and by the way, that last scene that I suggested for you is found in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. All of the gospel authors understood it carefully.
Which scene is that?
Son of Man, and then the response of the high priest. Okay. And then, of course, you've got that powerful statement that's coming I was going to call it the Gospel of the Hebrews. It is, in one sense, a gospel. In another sense, it's a tremendous homily or sermon. And in another sense, it's somewhat like an epistle or letter, but it's a wonderful book. That reminded me of one other, and this is a rabbinic statement, Romans chapter 9. Just to spread this understanding throughout the entirety of the text to show that it's not just found in some places or lifted from some places. Okay. I speak the truth in the Messiah. And he's talking about his relationship and his passion for his people, him being Rav Shaul. And he talks about all the benefits of the Jewish people. Theirs is the adoption as children. There's the divine glory. We talked in term, remember last night, because all of you who are in front of me were here last night to have heard this. The adoption as children, that is something that Rav Shaul mentions in Ephesians chapter 1, right in the very beginning. As part of our special status, we have been adopted as children. In other words, we've got the special status with God. Theirs is the divine glory because they got to experience it, the covenants, the receiving of the Torah, the temple worship, and the promises. Theirs are the patriarchs and matriarchs, and from them is traced the human ancestry of the Messiah. Ready? Who is God over all, forever praised. So the rabbi was very clear in his understanding as well. So that's a brief summary or survey of what these texts teach or what they understood about the nature of Yeshua. How does all that fit in with understanding that God is three and yet God is one? Because after all, we all know that 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. To which my response in Jewish math is, well, that's true, but 1 × 1 × 1 is still 1. The Jewish skeptic, some call him heretic, Spinoza, I think like from the 17th century, put it this way, I'm going to butcher his quote, but I'm going to try to get it as best as I can, and he got it right. What we know of God is incomplete. Oh gosh, I wish I had a statement in front of me. I'm really butchering this. Let me back that up and see if I can get this out better. God has infinite attributes. That's it. God has infinite attributes, of which we know only a few, and those imperfectly. So given that knowledge, you try explaining God. Our God who is above and beyond space and time, and the God whom even as the rabbis understood exists not in 4 dimensions, but in better than 10. And we have enough difficulty trying to understand 4 dimensions, let alone anything more than that. So with that, I will conclude my response to part of what's in here. There's more to it. You have hunted up a couple things, or maybe not.
No.
Is there anything you would like to add at this point?
No.
Since I've monopolized it.
No.
All right. Then I will reread one of the verses that I read. And the Jews picked up stones to stone him. The Jewish people hated him and they tried to stone him. That gets us set up for the request that was made from one of you. And that was that we continue talking about forget exactly how you phrased it, where the church and Messianic Judaism has gotten it wrong. Boy, you phrased it so nicely too. The incorrect teachings that are out there. And one of the incorrect teachings is based on this particular verse. So I'm going to use it simply as a stepping stone. They picked up stones, stepping stone with me, to stone him. The term the Jews, as you find it in the Gospel of John consistently, and you find this also in Rav Shaul's writing, is a specific reference not to the Jewish people. Not to the Jewish people. It's a reference to the Jewish religious leadership headquartered in Jerusalem that mainly consisted of the Sanhedrin, the high priest, the chief priests, and those who were part of the Sanhedrin. So the Jewish people did not try to stone Yeshua, but yes, the Jewish religious leadership headquartered in Jerusalem did. Now, what we need to know from you, unless you remember, how far did we get on this list?
But so
Of
we
trust.
weren't working from this list. We were working from the ADL's list.
Yeah, but no, didn't we start this list?
No, we didn't
Oh.
have a copy with us.
Oh,
We were just, we were
oh,
winging it.
I was thinking it was this list. Boy, wait till we get into this. Unless you want to hop into that.
Well, no, I would like to see
Finish off the
what we
ADL
were,
list.
well, no, I can tell better where we were at if I can see that other list.
I thought we had, okay, hold on. Time out while I try to find that. In our fantastic, there it is, with a paper clip in front, so we can grab it easily.
All right. Wait a minute. We're on the first page.
No, we were on the second page, that's why I flipped it.
No, I wanted to see what else we got. All right, so this is what I have checked off. And these are, they're not from the ADL, they're from Jubelong. And Jubelong is a very nice website, because its whole purpose is to help any Gentiles that are living or trying to have a
Let me
Jewish
interrupt
household.
you.
Yes,
Because I forgot to do something we always ask. Any questions from the half dozen of you on what we've covered before we cover something else? Okay, Barbara.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand your initial statement. I kind of get part of it because in talking with people, I don't ever tell anybody they're going to hell because Yeshua said he will decide. And so it's his decision. And he looks at the heart. So, it's not up for me to say somebody is or is not. But my understanding is that we do have to believe and trust in Yeshua.
Yeah.
For that to happen. And so I didn't understand your statement when you said, no, if you don't believe in him, you won't go to hell.
No, what I said is if you don't believe that he is God, but you do have to, as you put it, believe in him or trust him. As he
Okay,
said,
I'm not getting that nuance.
you don't have to understand him fully as the one who is God in human form, for lack of a better term. You don't have to understand it. You don't have to explain it. You just have to trust that this one whom you see, who is in some sense supernatural, is the reason that you have a relationship or can have a relationship with God. So do I have to understand the Trinity to have a relationship with God through Yeshua?
I hope
No.
not.
No.
Anybody who says they understand the Trinity is, I don't think they quite see it, but your other quote got that one better.
Yeah. So that's that's the reason I began the way I did. While it's an important understanding of who Yeshua is, and just from the reading of the text that I shared with you, and those aren't the only ones, you can understand how important it is. But it is not, you don't have to understand that fully. All you have to understand is that he took your place in bridging the gap between you and God. And he did so because of his sacrifice, which ended in his death, burial, resurrection, and ascension. Now, if you want to sort out what all that means, that's fine. If you can't understand what all that means, that's fine. All you need to do is understand the basics.
Thank you.
And just to ratify what I just said, or confirm what I said, 1 Corinthians 15, verses, I think, 3 and 4, the rabbi summarizes what you have to believe. That Yeshua lived, died, was buried, and was raised again the third day. And he says, that is the good news. And you won't find in there that you have to understand the Trinity, or how a virgin could conceive, or how someone can be both fully God and fully human, or any one of those things. What you have to believe in what he did on our behalf. Fair enough? Okay, other questions? Steve?
Aramaic, this idea in the beginning, not just the Egypt.
Memra.
Yeah, that's something you would find if we were reading like on class.
No, it would be, Onkelos' time period would overlap with this time period. You find it in some of the Targums earlier than Onkelos. You find it, for example, in a Targum called Neophiti, which is, it's really Raiders of the Lost Ark stuff. It was literally uncovered in the Vatican Library. Neophiti happens to be part of what's called the Palestinian Targum tradition, and there were no such things as Palestinian Targums, because the Targums were around before it all was called Palestine. But that's the way they're referred to. You'll find that same use of Memra frequently, and the other two terms I mentioned as well in the conversation. Ikar or Yekar, those are two related terms for glory, and Shekinah. You'll find those in common use in the Targumic tradition. And yes, Onkelos is part of that. Not the earliest part of it, but it's part of that. I would say it functions very much like that. And I was about to say something else, but that would get us sidetracked and might get me in trouble. So I'll try to go zip and not get into trouble. But yes, it functions equivalent to Hashem, or it functions equivalent to whenever we read in the scroll, in the Torah scroll, the Sefer Torah, whenever we encounter that four-letter name of God, Yod He Vav He, the reader is told you don't read it, you read it as Adonai. So it functions in the sense of both of those things. Okay, so good question. All right, other questions? All right, now, sorry for that long interruption.
That's quite all right. That's quite all right. What were we talking about? Oh, yeah, where we were on the list.
Jubalong.
Jubalong is a great website because its emphasis is introducing Jewish things to Gentiles that are interested. And so I find it very down to earth and very much, it's not elementary things, but it is aimed at basic things that most people don't know about, Jewish people. All right. And so this is, they put out a list, a numbered list of what they felt were points of anti-Semitism that many people nowadays get confused on. They, because they don't know, people don't know about Jewish ideas and Jewish values and what Jewish people actually believe, then they assume things and they don't really get underlying ideas about what is it that I believe that could be wrong. Is that the best way to put
Yeah.
it? If we look to ourselves and say, I think I understand Jewish people, but what am I getting wrong? So here's a list of things that they recommended that needed to be pointed out. I'm just going to briefly read the ones we went over already, because now it's been months since we went over these. All right, number one happens to be being a Zionist means you stand for a safe and secure Israel, period. If you don't agree with all of Israel's policies, that's okay, but it's a different conversation. I think you and I would agree, we don't agree with all the policies of the Israeli government or Israeli politicians.
Most Israelis don't agree with what their politicians.
Just like in America. In fact, it's even more. There's even more.
Yeah,
The dialogue is very heavy and heated.
just to set it in historical context, the present Prime Minister of Israel was elected by a minority of the Israeli population. And it wasn't anywhere near close to even half.
It doesn't help Americans that they operate under what would be known as a parliamentary form of government. And so, and I'm going to include myself, I don't understand how that works totally. But that's America has a problem with understanding how governments come and go in Israel. Number two, Jews comprise only 1.8% of the population in the United States. That's less than 2% of the population in the US are Jews, but they are the targets of 60% of the religious hate crimes in America.
And that was before October 7th.
Correct. This is from 18 months ago. And I have this little note here that I got from another source. And they said that Jews are only 2% of the United States population.
Rounded up,
And
yeah.
if you want to sort of have a comparison, so African Americans comprise about 10% of American population. Jewish people, 2% of the population. And on the world population, what percentage of the world population do we think the Jewish people are? Yes, that is. Did you guess or did you know? Here we go, 0.2%. Yeah, it's easy to remember when you have 2% of US and 0.2% of the world population. And yet, there's an awful lot of news that comes to the world, and the world is always extremely interested in what's going on in Israel. When we were there in the past, I think it's probably the same, that the two cities in the world that have the most reporters and representatives of media in them are Washington, D.C. and Jerusalem. And they have the most coverage by media, both those cities. Number three, for white supremacists or white nationalists, either one, Jews are not white. This comes from lines of thinking that have come from, I would say, the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s in Europe, where, and sometimes you can hear this. I was watching really interesting program yesterday about what happened in Germany between the end of World War II and about 1950. And that was, I didn't know a lot about it. But here's what the guy said, is we were called the Jewish race. And I don't think we would say that anymore. I don't think Jews are not a race. they're all different colors. First of all, when you go to Israel, you have Jewish people with every different skin tone that you could possibly imagine. So that's not, I mean, just the color of your skin is inaccurate.
Yeah.
Do they share common DNA? Yeah, sort of. Yeah, what were you gonna
What I was
say?
gonna say is, I can remember that I did not grow up in the United States as part of the white race. I was not considered that as I was growing up.
Really?
Mhm.
You didn't think so? How did you come to that understanding?
Just by people's conversation and then the various things that you would fill out as to what's your racial background.
But see, I don't remember ever being asked on racial surveys that Jewish was an option. It used to be because he's older than
It is much.
well, evident. I think what you experienced was because it was closer to the World War II.
Yes,
And mine was further away from
Yeah.
World War II time.
yes, exactly.
So this racial idea that Jews are a different race and we're not white. In fact, I've heard discussions, not a lot of discussions, but I have heard discussions about it's not fair that Jewish people are treated as though we're white. Oh, okay, what? You know, it's like, okay, because is it purely skin color then? Because I know a lot of people would disagree with that race is just your skin color. That's a whole nother topic. But anyway, for white nationalists or Christian nationalists, we are not white. We are other. Other. For the far left, that's the other side of the political spectrum, we're white colonists. So they are anti-Zionists and they don't like us because they think we colonized a part of the Arab world. Once again, if you have not studied more or less 20th century world history, you will not understand what happened and how the Jewish people got a plot of land in the Middle East. But anyway, it's almost like we can't do anything right, from both ends of the spectrum. There have always been Jews in Israel. Many people, or I'm just going to say Americans, many Americans have a perception that there were no Jews in what was then called the Holy Land, and that Jews only started to come after World War II, which is totally false. It is totally false. There have always been Jews in Jerusalem and in all the area that was designated as Greater Syria. It did not just happen after World War II. There were Sephardic Jews have been there since time immemorial. So that means since the Middle Ages. And Ashkenazi Jews tended to come more in the 1880s, 1890s, 1900s as pogroms went on in Eastern Europe. They either walked to the Holy Land, as it was called, Greater Syria, or they took boats from Italy to get there. But we have thousands of Jews coming back in the 1800s, but there were Jews all over the area then. Yes.
In fact, in the 1840s, the largest population, the largest group of people in Jerusalem were Jews. They were not the majority, but they were what we call the plurality. The largest people group in Jerusalem was Jews.
Because remember,
1840s.
From 1600 until 1947, the Holy Land was under the control of the Ottoman Turks. And they were the ones in charge. So that's going on 500 years, being under the aegis of the Ottoman Turks. The Ottoman Turks were defeated during World War I. And as a comeuppance of being defeated, they had to let go of all their areas under their rule. And Greater Syria was divided into several different places. But the Holy Land was part of Greater Syria. Where are we? So to say that Jewish people colonized Israel is so wrong. It's just totally inaccurate. Because I said they lived there for hundreds and hundreds of years, some of them, and then they started coming in, and it was not a conscious choice to make a colony out of this by anybody. It was as the population shifted, starting with the 1840s, 1850s, and then into the end. And then as things changed after World War I, then it seems to people who didn't understand how the things were being ruled, that the Jews took over, and they shouldn't have done that because it was Arab. No, it's just not that simple and cut and dry. How do you colonize a place where you've been living for 2,000 years? I don't think you can possibly do that. Number 4, the Anti-Defamation League reports there was a 34% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in the US in 1 year, from 2020 to 2021, 34% increase.
And that's only increased since then.
Yes. Israel is the only democracy in a region where women can be arrested and even punished physically for showing their face in public, and gay people can also be punished just for showing up and being present. That's another thing that people don't consciously realize. Yes. I'm going to reword this, but number 7, which we didn't go over, number 7.
Did we do, you covered 6?
Where? No, because I don't think it's as apropos as
Okay.
the other ones.
Fair enough.
They call this stupid stereotype alert. Not all Jews are white, rich, and powerful. Not all Jews are white, rich, and powerful. That couldn't be further from the truth. As I've said, if you go to Israel, you will see Jews of every different skin color and every different facial characteristics and every different kind of, from every different nation. The reason why we in America, we don't see what we consider a lot of poor Jewish people.
Before you leave that, sorry, I want to talk about the ethnic groups in Israel. We have been told that there are as many as 100 different ethnic, 100 different Jew. No, try that again. There are Jews from around 100 different ethnic backgrounds in Jerusalem.
Which becomes obvious once you get off the plane and you start looking around. The reason why in America we don't think of Jewish people as being poor, we don't see communities of poorer Jews, is because since the 1940s, poor Jews who leave other countries go to Israel, because Jews who return to Israel are guaranteed a place to live, are guaranteed a job, they're guaranteed language lessons. There has been so much to make it easy for anybody in the world, whether they have a lot of money or not, to go to Israel. So we don't tend to see Jewish people not as well off. But trust me, there are poor Jewish people. We just don't tend to see them here in America.
Before you go, continue on. When we first started out working in what is called Jewish ministry, we were working with a group in Chicago, and one of their major focuses was to provide food and clothing to the poor Jewish people in the surrounding neighborhoods. That was one of their
Back in
major,
the 1880s.
but even when that was still part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. When we joined them.
Number 8, holding Israel, the only Jewish state in the world, to different standards than other sovereign countries is anti-Semitic. In other words, the concept of the Jewish state has to be perfect because they have to be perfect. No other countries have to be perfect, but doggone it, shame on the Jews if they don't do this right and this right and this right and this right, according to me, whoever I am. And we've seen that oftentimes. Or we've heard it oftentimes. Let's see. This isn't, there was another sheet, wasn't there? That was it. Which, no, which, so these are the ones we dealt with
Yes.
just on the first page?
Yep.
And we didn't deal with these?
Yes, correct.
Yet.
Yes,
Okay.
it was their top 10 list.
It was their top 10 list. Yeah, but the quality of all these 10 are not
Not the
equal.
same, yeah.
Anything else that we wanted to go over here? Now this was the original thing we started out with, but then we went to a conference in San Diego last month and they asked me to speak. I'm not sure why they asked me to speak. And I chose to speak on the topic of, well, they asked me to speak to begin with on how Messianic Judaism, what do we see the future of Messianic Jews to be, which was interesting. Because I think they thought we were going to have like an end times talk, or they assumed that I was going to say something very high and esoteric and very philosophically brilliant. And I chose to say, we have a long way to go within the Messianic movement because John and I, down through the years, we have been surprised as we're, you're sitting in an audience, you're sitting waiting for something to start and you overhear people's conversations. And so we would hear people make statements who are there, presumably they're Messianic Jews unless they were all visitors, but I don't think they were. And they would say to each other in conversation several different kinds of anti-Semitic things that they'd learned from the Christian church. And I'd like to point out that many people don't know how the Messianic movement started. And I'm not going to go into that now, but in general, the modern Messianic movement started in 1974, 75 with 4 congregations in the country, all different, who didn't know that each other existed. There was one in California, there was one in Washington, DC, there was one,
DC came later.
DC, came later,
Yeah.
Baltimore.
No, yeah, there may have been something in Baltimore.
Okay, well, where were the other ones then?
I'm thinking
Chicago.
it depends on how you count that one, yes. Toronto, Philadelphia,
Yeah.
maybe the others. Yeah.
Okay. And so it really was a ground level movement. It was a grassroots movement. It was not accomplished by a mission board coming in and saying, this is what we're going to do. There were Jewish believers that used to meet because we were known as Hebrew Christians back then. Like his parents who accepted Yeshua during the Holocaust in Hungary, they understood themselves in America to be called Hebrew Christians. And it was early in the 1970s when those of us who called ourselves Hebrew Christians felt very uncomfortable with that terminology because of coming out of the Holocaust, the perception that it was a Christian problem, that the Holocaust was a Christian problem. And there's something to be said for that. But if you called yourself a Jewish Christian, that was be like, I'm a positive negative. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't, it's like jumbo shrimp. It doesn't, those two things contradict each other, even though you would like it to be true. And so it sort of started with that discussion where older people didn't mind at all. In fact, they loved being called Hebrew Christian. And those of us who were younger were going, no, it's icky. It doesn't really say who we are, and it doesn't identify us as Jewish people. And we're becoming very unsatisfied with the way churches in general treated Jewish people in their midst. So it's true today still, but in those days. So this Jewish family went to this church and this Jewish family went to that church. And then this church over here has a couple of Jewish believers and this Jewish believers go to that church. And they didn't really talk to each other. And it seemed like to those of us who went to church regularly, that if you were Jewish and in a church, because you were strange, that people used to point at you and go, oh, here's our Jewish friend. Aren't they nice? Aren't they great? And after a while, you're just going, could I just not be the Jewish friend that's here in the church? Because I really don't feel comfortable with that. And it also had to do with Christians' perceptions about how Jewish people worshiped, and was all just crazy and mistaken. And especially if you were in an area where it's possible to be in America and never have met a Jew in person. And we would go to churches because that was part of our work that we needed to do. And we literally had people come up to us and say, I met a Jew once. And we go, well, you're talking to us. Oh, yeah. So, and things like that. We just became a little unhappy with not being able to make people understand where we come from and why, our culture is valuable. Because another thing that happened, which in a different context would be funny, which is his parents, people would literally come up to his parents and say, you need to eat a ham sandwich so you can prove to us that you're a believer. People don't intend to do this, but this is what happened. And it happened regularly. And when we would meet, there was a club, that's what it was, a club called the Hebrew Christian Alliance, that once a month, Jewish believers from all these different churches would get together on like a Saturday night, and they'd come and they'd hear a speaker, and then they have dessert, and that was being Hebrew Christian. And then everybody split up and went back to their churches. And so it was in the club afterwards where we would like go out for coffee or we stick around and eat extra dessert. And we talk to each other and we go, we're not happy with the way the worship services are. We're not happy with we got together and we go, why is it that we couldn't say the Shema? Because it's scripture. Why can't you do that in a church? It's sort of important in your Jewish life to say the Shema. It's sort of important, really, even to talk about the Old Testament, because they don't do a lot of that either. Once you leave Sunday school as a 12-year-old, you don't really hear too much about the Old Testament at all anymore, because then you're in Sunday school and in church and they only talk about the New Testament. It was all these kinds of things. How did I get on this topic?
You were asked to give a talk.
And so the people who were sitting before me in San Diego, who a lot of them don't know where they came from. They just have no clue that this is how it started, that there were people in our midst there who came out of the same type of thing and from different parts of the country, and who only joined together when we decided, that we wanted to worship in a Jewish way, including worshiping Yeshua in a Jewish way rather than in your average Christian way. And that, second of all, once you have these congregations, as little as they might be, that the congregations would need sort of to meet each other so that we could get to know other congregations and we could share ideas and we could share, we could commiserate is the best way to put that. And that also started to happen where, oh, we didn't even know there was a congregation, you know, in Georgia, or, you know, pick a state or pick an area of the country. We had no idea that these were popping up literally all over. And so the people sitting in front of us have come. We all were discipled by different people. We all came to the Lord in different ways. Some of us came through mission agencies like Jews for Jesus or Chosen People Ministry, and some of us came individually, and a person that we cared about discipled us individually, or in a college campus, which is where I came. And so in a college campus, you're discipled on the college campus with a group. And they had no clue that this is how the organization that we have now actually developed and got started. And they were also unaware that since we were all discipled by believers, different places, then we all have a different sort of theology. And that it's sort of not discussed because it's sort of assumed that, well, of course you agree with me, except those of us who've experienced anti-charismatic people together with charismatic Christian people. That's a little touchy. Can be a little awkward. And no, they weren't discipled in the same way. And, you know, they weren't taught exactly the same thing. And so John and I have been disturbed by the amount of it. It isn't just, it's Christian theology. We all came understanding or being taught within Christian theological systems. It's that some of the bad stuff that's taught in Christian theological systems were carried along by Messianic Jews, and they don't realize that is stuff that's not true, or that is the kind of stuff that's so unhelpful and in a certain areas anti-Semitic. That doesn't mean that everybody understands that. It doesn't. In fact, a lot of people who carry these beliefs with them because of how they were discipled and what they came to understand, and that would be incorrect. And somehow they never hear, by the way, that's incorrect. And not that we want to blame people, but we want to highlight. We want to highlight some ideas, some sections of theology that many Christians believe. But that doesn't mean it's correct. It doesn't. And in my understanding of it, as I am now getting older, that we look back on where we used to be at, say, 20 years ago. Do I believe exactly the same things that I believed 20 years ago? Maybe. But if any of us have our faith and we use our faith every day, in other words, it's a living faith in our lives, and we meet together with other believers on a regular basis, your ideas are going to change in some areas. And that would be okay. In fact, it probably would be good, because as we learn and we learn more, we learn new things, then we have to sift it into, okay, here's the things I knew. Now I have to sift in this new ingredient. How is this going to make the cake different? Because the cake is going to be different if different ingredients are in there. And if I'm making a cake and I decide I really don't want nutmeg in my cake because I don't like it anymore, then the recipe is, thank goodness, it's going to change. You're going to learn better things for you. You're going to put aside things that are not as good, and you're going to adopt things that are even better. Am I making any sense whatsoever?
Yes, Sam, not me.
I hope I'm making some sense. So, it was shocking to John and I that we would hear believers, Jewish believers, saying things that were not true. So I made a list of them. I said, and I'm going to just point out a few of these statements that we've heard being made. And I'm going to point out why that would be an incorrect understanding of those things. And some of them can be silly, but usually at the Messianic level, people really, really learn about Judaism and the way it operates, the way it works, what is acceptable within Judaism, what isn't. It's more or less when they go into the newer Testament understandings or some theological understandings that they don't listen to themselves, or nobody has said, why did you just say that? Because that's icky, or it's that we know now that's not true. Where's my list?
Well, I'm thinking since it's 8:30.
Well, let me just name a couple of them.
Oh, name them, but we won't cover them.
I'll give you some examples.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so actually, this is part of the PowerPoint I did for my talk. And it's introduced by the statement, maybe you have fallen into one of these traps. And by the traps, I meant things that we learn as new believers. And so I'm sort of presenting this. Maybe do these statements seem familiar to you or seem like they make sense? Number one example, during the Second Temple period, the vast majority of Jews rejected Jesus. Number two, the Pharisees hated Jesus and he hated them. Religious Jews believe they can be saved by performing good deeds. These are the examples of things that people would say, and none of these are correct. But unless they're pointed out, we're still going to have the same, I'm going to say baggage, not in a good way, the same baggage. And there are certain bags of certain suitcases we need to get rid of. There's certain suitcases we love and we think we will carry them along. And then there's certain suitcases we got to leave them behind. So that's the example of some of them.
And
We'll start working on some of these, I thought,
in coming weeks.
in coming weeks. What's the meaning of the new covenant in Jeremiah 31? Is it new? Brand new, brand spanking new. Just thought of it. Jeremiah just got it. He just thought of it. He wrote it down and it contradicts everything else. True or not true? Not true. See, those kinds of things. And sometimes it's hard to put your finger on them, but there's a group of us, we keep adding to the list of things that churches teach that are not really true.
And because of their discipleship, as Patrice pointed out, things that I was going to say many, let's just say significant numbers of people in the Messianic Jewish movement also believe or teach them.
One of the major things that I think the Messianic movement accomplished was to allow Jewish people who felt comfortable with your Jewish way of life, who felt comfortable with your Jewish way of worshiping, who felt comfortable with living culturally Jewish in America today. They were Christians. They were able to find other people to join with them and to support each other and to encourage each other. And that has been a really important thing. And just by existing and talking together, Messianic Jews were able amongst themselves to get a more accurate picture of what Judaism is and how Messianic Jews actually fit into the idea of a wider, a worldwide Jewish community. And over the past half a century. I think that part we have accomplished well, because when we first started out, the Jews didn't approve of us. The Christians didn't approve of us. Nobody approved of us. We were not on the approved list to be anything. We'd say, I'm a Messianic Jew, and people would hear Masonic Jew. And so then no, we're not Messianic. And then there was a period of about 20 years where I'm a Messianic Jew. Oh, you're a Jew for Jesus. No. And they go, what? No, we are not Jews for Jesus. Well, don't you believe in Jesus? Yes, we do. Well, then you're a Jew for Jesus. No, that is an actual organization that's been around for a long time. They don't think that they're Messianic Jews themselves. And I'm a Messianic Jew, and I'm not a Jew for Jesus person. They are the ones who stand out on a street corner and pass out pieces of paper with the gospel message on it in New York City and San Francisco and all these big cities. And people take the piece of paper and they look at it for 1 minute and they throw it in the trash. That would be Jews for Jesus.
At least that's what they used to do.
Yeah, I think they still are. Well, many Jews for Jesus people, if a Jewish person accepts Yeshua through them, they don't bring them to a Messianic congregation. They bring them to a church. So a lot of people don't realize that. So if I surprise you with that, okay, you need to be surprised, because we do not consider ours. We have friends who work with Jews for Jesus. It's not like they're not nice people, but the way they conduct themselves is not the way we do it. And that's okay. There isn't just one way to conduct yourself. I'm done with my
All right,
sermonette.
okay. Any questions?
Do you think they still think when you say the word Messianic Jew, that you believe it's like Jews for Jesus, secretly trying to evangelize all the Jews?
That's why we always say, no matter who is asking us, they say you're Jews for Jesus. No. What? No. That's a group. They have a thing. They do their thing. We do not do the same kinds of things as them. And they are not all of them. I don't know what the percentage is anymore. They go to churches. There's Jewish believers in every church, it seems. There's a couple here and there. So it's not that weird. But to John and I, it is important. It was important that our children know that they're Jewish. That was extremely important. And that we were happy that we were so, and we weren't always trying to be good Christians, because not that there's anything wrong with good Christians, but we have to make choices in how we conduct our lives and in the culture that we live in and in what we value. And that was important to us. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, and I will add, I don't know if he's still active, but the pastor of one of the larger churches in this near vicinity is Jewish.
And he says, he talks about that.
And he has decided not to live a Jewish lifestyle. But so, yeah, that's just another example of what Patrice was saying.
Well, there was a couple seminary professors that we sat under. We know that there's others at other seminaries. And even though their families were Jewish families, they were not.
Not practicing.
They were just happy to be Christians.
Okay.
I've left
Thank
them
you
on
for
a downer.
No, thank you for that
Okay.
comment. Yeah.
Yeah. Now everyone feels bad now.
Any questions? Any questions?
Any answers?
Okay. Then we'll close in prayer, and I'm trying to think when we're next scheduled.
I didn't know we were scheduled. Are we?
Yeah, in March, I think. I don't remember exactly when. Give me a second. I think the calendar is on Joe's desk.
Okay, he's gonna go get the calendar. I'm getting out my calendar.
I just want to wish everyone Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.
And sorry I'm so late. I worked and things are going oddly at work. So
Okay, that's
Right.
Virginia talking to us.
pray for my work, my performance, for Mark Jr. and his marriage. Other than, and the woman here, her name's Rebecca.